everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I did have to switch up the filming location because the lighting was throwing a bit of a fit with me. So please enjoy the lovely scenery that is the door to my roommate's room and my vast and slightly embarrassing candle collection. In all fairness, I work at a craft store and I get like a discount on all of them, so it's not as expensive as it looks. Now, BookTube is currently in kind of the commemorative phase. Usually the months of December and January are kind of devoted to remembering the year of reading that has passed. And there are so many different ways to do this, from like top 10 videos, best of videos, general superlative videos like worst of, most disappointing, prettiest writing, etc, etc. And I do love to consume those videos, but when I thought about whether or not I wanted to actually make one of those videos, there were a few things that were holding me back. Big reasons being, like, one, I don't read like hundreds of books a year. I read a lot, but I don't read so much so that I like have a lot to pick from in terms of like favorites and least favorites. Like I can pretty easily just like look at my 5-star reads, look at my 1-star reads, and then be like, all right, favorites, least favorites. And it just felt like it'd be a little bit redundant for me to do that. My second reason for not wanting to just do like a best of, worst of, that sort of thing, is that I love a good competition. And I feel like within those videos, there's not always a lot of room for competition, especially if I was going to be drawing from the books that I read in 2021. Once again, I know who's going to win. And like, if I'm going to put in the effort to create that video, I want there to be some element of suspense. So what I wanted to do in making this video was provide a space for every book that I read in 2021 to essentially battle it out for the title of not best book of 2021, but best cockroach of 2021. For this video, I've taken all the books that I have read in 2021, with the exception of the 3 books that I read for school. The 72 books that I read in 2021 will fill 36 brackets, and then they will go head to head with their bracket buddy and either meet their maker or advance to the next round. Basically just a classic single elimination tournament between books. But the catch is that I didn't just want to go off my general feelings towards each book. I once again felt like that would just be a little bit boring. So any book simply cannot be the better of the two to advance to the next round. It has to be the better of the two based on the criteria for the round that it's in. Meaning that for each round, I am going to be drawing an element that will determine either the success or failure of any given book. This determining element can be anything from pacing to character development. It all just kind of depends on what gets drawn, but I did try and keep all of these guys general enough to where it can apply to pretty much any book. That said, I'm going to insert a little disclaimer here. There are some books in here that are just at a disadvantage right out the gate, depending on whatever category I end up picking, those books being short story collections, graphic novels, the singular nonfiction I read. I understand they're at a disadvantage. I'm gonna try my best to work around that. Like, I will try and think, like, did this book do a good job at, like, characterization for the genre that it was in? Now, a big reason for me wanting to do a competition this way was to sort of erase the star ratings and look at the merits or lack thereof of these books, rather than just thinking like, oh, I gave that 3 stars or 4 stars. But just because I read 72 books and I don't expect everybody to have watched all of my reading wrap-ups, I'm actually hoping some of you are new viewers because I have very little. I am going to introduce you to all 72 of the books via star rating, and we're going to start with arguably our weakest contestants, the 1 stars. These 6 books that I'm showing you now will not win. They're mostly playing for the participation trophy and to be roasted one last time before I move on to the 2022 1-star books. I only give out 1-star reviews if I liked little to sometimes nothing about the book. I'm really just interested to see how far these books can go, if they can go anywhere at all. Next up we have our 2 stars, which are unlikely to win, but within these 13 books there are some smatterings of objective and subjective good. I will also be handing out individual awards to whichever book makes it the furthest from its star pool. So the competition is mostly like relegated to the 2-star pool for these guys, because once again, I don't really think any of them have a chance of winning, but they are still in a competition to some degree, just as the 1-stars are. If you happen to see one of your favorite books in here, or one of your favorite books in the 1-star category for that matter, who knows, they could be crowned 1 or 2-star royalty. So stick around. And now, moving on to our 3-star club, which in my mind is basically just 21 wild cards. I give out 3-star ratings when a book was either kind of meh for me, or if it did some things really, really well and an equal amount of things pretty poorly. So if I end up selecting a criteria that a 3-star book really excelled in, and I just keep doing that, a 3-star book could easily win. And part of me is kind of hoping that a 3-star book does win, because I think that would be kind of cool. Only slightly more OP is our 4-star club, which also happens to be our largest. The 28 books in this club make up a pretty formidable force, and several of these titles are coming into this match with pretty good stats on their side. A lot of these had great characterization, great atmosphere, great plots, but definitely not all of them. This competition is also really a way for me to like air out some of the negative thoughts that I ended up forming like long after finishing the book and reviewing it, because some of these 4-star books, I don't really think they deserve to be here after some thought. I was generous when I gave them the rating. I'm not going to be generous today. And finally, we have the 4 virtually bulletproof books that made it into my highly exclusive 5-star club. I am ridiculously picky and selective when it comes to 5-star books, so I love these books. Not think that they were good, not think that the writer did a good job. Like, I love these books. In my mind, if any of these books are going out, it's going to be like that scene in The Hobbit where Bilbo realizes that Smaug is missing like a single scale on his like massive body. Like, that is kind of the only way I see these books going out. These books are essentially the career pack in the Hunger Games. Like, everyone kind of expects them to win. However, any one of these books has the ability to be our Katniss Everdeen today. And it all depends on these criteria, which I'm gonna go ahead and tell you what they all are now. I made more than I needed to just because I wanted to cover most of the bases of what makes a book good. So I'm gonna go ahead and read off the definitions that I made for myself. So we have quality of writing, which I have defined as books that delivered compelling and smart writing on a sentence-by-sentence level. Next up we have characterization/character development, which I've defined as books that gave life to their characters, both good and bad. And the important thing to note here, character likability is not a factor. Next up we have atmosphere/development of setting, which is books that made me feel as though I was there through a combination of engaging and expressive writing and the right amount of world building. Next up we have page turn appeal, books that I couldn't stop reading. Then concept to plot follow through, which is books that presented a fresh and creative concept and delivered on the concept by implementing a strong plot to support it. Next we have pacing/editing, books that knew when to shut up and get down to business, or just generally had a good editor working behind the scenes. And already I know that there are quite a few books that are absolutely quaking at the sound of that category. The Death of Jane Lawrence, The Other Black Girl, The Twisted Ones, all books where I think the editor had just taken the summer off. Next up we have satisfying conclusion, which is really gonna test my memory. And it's gonna be books that took a bow they deserved to take and did it with a flourish. And the last criteria I'm a little bit afraid to pick because it's kind of chaotic. For pretty much all of these categories, I don't have a lot of faith in the 1-star books surviving them. And I wanted to kind of throw them a lifeline. And that lifeline is going to be the memorability category. You don't have to be good, I just have to remember you. And based on the amount of rage that 1-star books usually bring up for me, they tend to be pretty memorable. So if I happen to draw that category first, the 1-star books are basically saved. Now I've made you a little slideshow so that you can see who's going up against who. Like I said, these categories were made randomly. You can probably tell by the fact that there are several books that were placed together where like the color coordination is completely off, and I do not like looking at the slides that I put together, but I had to do it randomly. I had to give everybody a fair chance. So we'll go ahead and roll that. I hope that was dramatic enough for you. I hope you're getting into the Hunger Games spirit of things. If I had the charisma of Caesar Flickerman, maybe I would do like a little interview series with all the books or something, but A, that would take too long, and B, I'm no Caesar Flickerman. And without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and get this bloodbath on a roll. I don't think I mentioned, but every book that gets eliminated immediately goes out of print as well, so I do have that power. And we're going to go ahead and select the determining factor that is going to decide what books get to stick around. Oh my gosh, it's memorability. All right. Already, I'm sorry to The Wolf Wants In, the least memorable book I read of 2021. For the first round, I have like everything written out on a sheet of paper, and I'm just gonna go ahead and start going. I'm gonna have the camera running the whole time I'm doing this, but I'm probably not gonna really include any explanations. I'll probably just like show you which ones I'm eliminating, unless of course we have any major shakeups or there's two books that I'm really struggling to decide between, just so that we could all go home at a reasonable hour. I'm not going to force you to watch 36 different deliberations, but I'll go ahead and walk you through the very first bracket, which is the competition between What Comes After and The Girl in the Well Is Me. I am already really regretting drawing the memorability one for this, because yes, it'll save the 1 stars, but at what cost? I have to now decide which book was more memorable, which is so subjective it almost doesn't even count. I'm gonna go ahead and give this one to What Comes After, just because this did offer some very horrifying insights into the idea that like human beings can be awful but also really good, and just it did a good job with that, so we'll go ahead and give it to that one, but it was a tight race. For the next round, I'm already annoyed. I really did not like Malibu Rising. It was one of the most disappointing reads of the year for me. But when it's paired with The Woman in Black, I hate it, but yeah, it was more memorable. Oh, and there's The Wolf Wants In. Sorry. I remember being mad at the kitchen front, but that's pretty much it. And ladies and gentlemen, we have our first 1-star victor. Between The Other Black Girl and Warcross, I do have to say The Other Black Girl was at least trying some different things, and that did make her memorable. I do have to say, if I had to pick probably like the best 1-star book, I would say it's The Other Black Girl. I think that it was trying to do some unique things, and it had some good moments. But if we hit pacing and editing, and if we hit concept plot follow through, The Other Black Girl's toast. So we have reached a much anticipated showdown between Piranesi and The Drowning Kind. Piranesi is probably the book that was the closest to getting 5 stars without actually getting 5 stars. And really the only reason it did not receive 5 stars was because it did not have a satisfying conclusion. Meanwhile, The Drowning Kind, while it did receive a 5-star from me, is probably the lowest hanging fruit of the 5-star club. I read that book in a day and I really enjoyed it, but because I read it so quickly, a lot of my 5-star feelings towards it were just kind of like the awe of like existing in a book's presence for a whole day straight, and then like you come out of it and you're just like, that was amazing! And while I still love the book, I can acknowledge in hindsight, it wasn't like the best book I've ever read. Watch Over Me was memorable in the sense that it disappointed me maybe more than any other book that I read this year. I'm pretty sure that Malibu Rising and Watch Over Me conspired together in 2021 to make me sad, but I think I'm gonna have to go ahead and give this one to Prepped. Orbiting Jupiter is like 100 pages long and the text is like that big, so you read it in like 2 hours. But Bone White is like your standard 300-page book, and it took me ages to read because I hated the writing style so much. So yes, Bone White stayed with me for so long that I cannot possibly forget it. I cannot forget the dread that I felt every time I realized that I was still reading that godforsaken book. I'm so sorry, Orbiting Jupiter. You were the better book, but I have to follow the rules. And here comes another 1-star to take a spot it doesn't deserve. The Grip of It by Jack Jemk. I hated it so much. I think it was my least favorite book of the year. Granted, it was up against The Good Son, which I also really did not like. Certainly did not hate it as much as The Grip of It. Miracle Creek, by far more memorable than Who is Maud Dixon. One of my biggest issues with The Last Thing You Told Me was its lack of memorability, and I think it's largely stemming from the fact that the characterization in that book was pretty weak. I thought it had a good plot, but that is not the criteria we are judging on today. Now, these two books are very, very evenly matched. What Beauty There Is and The Death of Jane Lawrence. I think it's like an even split in terms of like how many categories each book would win, because I know pacing and editing would absolutely slaughter The Death of Jane Lawrence, but I also know quality of writing would slaughter What Beauty There Is. Atmosphere and setting, I'd have to think about that one for a while. Characterization, characterization would also be a lengthy thought process, because in The Death of Jane Lawrence, the characterization is incredibly inconsistent, and then in What Beauty There Is, we had a whole lot of telling versus showing when it came to characterization. Like, the main girl was constantly referring to the love interest, who is also the main male protagonist, as like her sweet, gentle Jack, and we never really saw him being sweet or gentle. This was just kind of her internal dialogue, and like that was really all the characterization we got. But that's a bit of a tangent. I think I'm just kind of trying to air out last minute opinions on some of these books that I didn't like. Memorability, I have to give it to What Beauty There Is, and for only one reason, which is that there is a line from that book that replays in my head every single day. It was a line that made me laugh out loud when I read it, and I'm being mean now. So if you don't like seeing people be mean, just skip. It's nitpicky and dumb. Not every single line in any given book is going to be a work of art. But the main character, Jack, was like running through the woods and the branches were like scratching his face. And he's running through the woods, and the way that they described this, the sentence was, scratching skin, doing harm. And just like the doing harm part made me laugh so hard, because I'm like, yeah, duh, it's doing harm. It's cutting his face open. And every single time I am like mildly wounded, like I stub a toe, I trip, automatically my brain supply is scratching skin, doing harm. So on those grounds alone, congratulations, What Beauty There Is. You live to see another day. I'm actually in pain. Infinite Country was a good book. It was a very well done book. It was short, to the point. It told a really beautiful story about a family trying to get back together after spending years apart due to some immigration issues that they came up across. And it's a gorgeous book. I think everyone should read it. However, I was really distracted when I read it, and I didn't have that much to say about it other than, like, it is really good. I have a lot to say about The Silent Patient. None of it good, but I have a lot to say. And this is exactly what the memorability category stands for. Whew, Anxious People and the Final Girl Support Group. I'm gonna go ahead and give it to Anxious People, just because I think it's more unique. I'm a little bit bummed that we didn't have a different category for these two, because I had a lot of issues with both books. The Final Girl Support Group, I initially gave 4 stars, but since giving the Final Girl Support Group 4 stars, I've seen a lot of people on BookTube like critique it, and I found myself agreeing with like all of their criticisms. So part of me is just like, I feel like I can't agree with this many people who hate this book and still give it 4 stars. So if I were to go back and change one rating, it would probably be that one, but I don't do that. I stick to my guns. Both of these books had a lot wrong with them, but I definitely think about Then She Was Gone way more than I think of Honey Girl. Even though I think about both of them in terms of just like, man, why weren't you a better book? We do have our first 1 star to actually still lose in the memorability category. I can understand that there are some flaws with 8 Perfect Murders, but I was just like really in the right headspace to read that book when I did read it, so I like flew through it, read it in a day, had a fantastic time, and because of that, I just think of it very fondly, even though I'm aware there are flaws. People talk about it, I've seen it, I understand. It looks like love trumps hate today. My feelings of rage towards Words in Deep Blue have kind of cooled over the months, so this is gonna go to 8 Perfect Murders. Kind of sad that this had to happen to The Nature of Fragile Things. Catch the Rabbit was the more memorable of the two, which makes me so sad, because The Nature of Fragile Things could have gone so far. I had such a good time with that book. I have so many good things to say. I have good things to say about Catch the Rabbit as well, so it's you know, they were worthy opponents. Just, you know, sorry, The Nature of Fragile Things. The other books should be a little bit scared that memorability was the category, because No Exit and Clara and the Sun, while I think Clara and the Sun is a better book, No Exit, very strong contender, and there were quite a few categories in which No Exit could have definitely beat Clara and the Sun. And I'll be completely honest, I don't necessarily think that Clara and the Sun is going to be beat by a whole lot of other books. Like, No Exit had the opportunity to take it out with like page turn appeal. To be completely honest, I don't know if there's going to be another book that has the capacity to beat Clara and the Sun. I hate that The Winter Girl is advancing. I hate it. I hate it. I wanted to crush this book. I don't want it to have the chance of being the 1-star book that makes it the furthest. I love how I moved locations to make the lighting better, and yet we are just struggling across the board. So with the first incredibly controversial round out of the way, I'm gonna go ahead, turn the camera off for a second, and write up the next bracket of books, and I will come back to you when it is time to draw the determining factor for round 2. All right, we now have the new brackets, which I'm seeing for the first time. I'm gonna go ahead and show you these brackets really quickly just now as I'm talking. For the first round, for what comes after to win, honestly, almost anything I draw will help it win. It just generally was a better book. However, Page Turn Appeal could be Malibu Rising's Saving Grace. A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians is kind of screwed, honestly. The Dutch House is just a better book in pretty much every aspect. Wakenhurst is also a really strong opponent. I think that the only way Wakenhurst would meet its downfall is if I were to draw a satisfying conclusion, because I definitely felt like the conclusion tried a little bit too hard to explain things that should have probably been left ambiguous, which ended up leaving me with more questions and frustrations than satisfaction. Whereas Anya's Ghost did a great job. Wrapped things up in a neat little bow. Now, How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House is a book where I think it did so many things really, really well. Definitely suffered from first book syndrome. It was the author's first published novel, and it kind of showed a little bit. There were definitely some issues with the pacing mainly, but the other Black girl had all of those issues and more in abundance, so I am pretty confident that How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House is going to make it through. Unsettled Ground is also kind of screwed. Piranesi's a pretty strong contender. Even if Satisfying Conclusion comes up, which I think is Piranesi's weakest spot, Unsettled Ground also did not have a very good conclusion. Prepped versus Wild Woman in the Blues. Both books I really enjoyed, but I definitely enjoyed Wild Woman in the Blues more. I just think there's a little bit more going on. Bone White versus The Grip of It. The Grip of It keeps coming into a bit of luck every time. It keeps coming up against like really low 2-star books for me. I don't want The Grip of It to make it far. It was a really, really bad book, but if it comes down to quality of writing, I would probably let The Grip of It pass on to the next round against my better judgment. Miracle Creek versus Year of the Witching. Both books I really enjoyed, but I do think Miracle Creek is going to end up pulling through on this one. What Beauty There Is versus The Twisted Ones. The Twisted Ones is a better book, but man, did it have its flaws. Pacing and editing being the main one. Silent Patient versus Allegedly. Allegedly is almost definitely going to win. I hated just about everything about The Silent Patient. Anxious People versus The Blacklands. The Blacklands is one of my favorite 5-star books. I loved it. And when it comes to concept to plot follow through, gonna be tricky because I do think both of them had very fresh concepts and I think that they followed through very well, except that with The Blacklands, we've definitely seen it potentially before. I mean, it's still a very original book in my opinion, but Anxious People, I will say, probably sets itself apart in that way. The Dark Descent versus Then She Was Gone. I'm almost positive The Dark Descent will win. Midnight at the Electric versus 8 Perfect Murders is going to be interesting because I think in most respects Midnight at the Electric has an edge, but when it comes to Page Turn Appeal, I'm really gonna have to think on that one because I actually read both of these books in one sitting, like did not leave the couch for either book. How to be the judge on that, I'm not really sure. We may have to enlist the help of a coin. Her Dark Curiosity versus The Lost Man. The Lost Man probably got this one. Catch the Rabbit versus When We Were Lost. This is another 1-star book. Congrats to Catch the Rabbit, you got an easy out. I didn't really think that Catch the Rabbit had a satisfying conclusion. Neither did When We Were Lost. So that is its weakest point, but I will have to think on that more if that is a facet. Clara and the Sun versus Eleanor Oliphant. Clara and the Sun's probably gonna win. We Were Restless Things versus Dead Mountain. This one could get interesting. We Were Restless Things had so much going for it, and then I don't even know what happened. I was so confused. It felt like the author just decided she wanted to write a different book within like the last like 20 pages, or honestly even less. Everything that we had been building towards, the author just kind of was like, I don't really want to do that anymore. Thank you, goodbye. But We Were Restless Things did do a lot right for being a 2-star book. So I do think that if it has the capacity to beat Dead Mountain, I very much think that it could be the 2-star book that makes it the farthest. Madman's Daughter versus The Winter Girl. I will not let The Winter Girl beat The Madman's Daughter. I'll rig it somehow, I promise. And now, the moment that will determine it all. Atmosphere / development of setting. Okay. I like how I went through all of my predictions and like I don't think I even once mentioned atmosphere or development of setting. Now I am going to actually go through these ones. I'm already expecting this video to be quite long anyway. What Comes After versus Malibu Rising. This one's tricky because What Comes After is actually set in my home state and is like, they mention my hometown like multiple times because it's like a town only a couple miles away. So it does kind of have a leg up there. For both books, I don't think of the setting as like a key component to it. The atmosphere for both of them felt like it kind of took the back seat. I don't just want to hand it to the one that was set in my home state. Like, that reeks of conspiracy. I'm gonna go ahead and give it to Malibu Rising just because there was a lot of emphasis on the siblings' love of surfing and the ocean, but I definitely think it got lucky here. I don't think that it's a super atmospheric book. I just don't really think that was the strength of either of these books, unfortunately. Now, The Dutch House just kind of had an automatic advantage because it was so focused on the house that it's set in, whereas in A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians, we've got like 3 different settings that we're rotating between. It does have less time to develop those settings, but even then I still feel pretty comfortable giving this one to The Dutch House. I think it did have a good sense of atmosphere, and it can be hard to really develop a sense of like home within a book because everybody's home looks so different, and especially in the case of The Dutch House where they're living in basically this giant mansion that like is not that relatable. They still did a good job of making the location feel like a home that was really precious to the main characters. So congratulations to The Dutch House. Wakenhurst versus Anya's Ghost. Wakenhurst wins this by a mile, although that sounds mean because Anya's Ghost did also have a really good sense of atmosphere, and in addition to that, Anya's Ghost was a graphic novel, so it was even harder for it to build that just because I'm spending less time in that world. But I honestly think that Wakenhurst could have won against any book it was put up against in this category. That was a really, really strong element of the book. It is very, very atmospheric. If you were looking for a creepy house set in like a bog, or no, they called it a fen. I don't actually know what the difference is, but Wakenhurst is set in this like grand manor on like a fen, and it's gorgeous and it's beautiful, and it talks all the time about how it smells like eels, and I loved it. How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House versus The Other Black Girl. Easily go into How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House. Unsettled Ground versus Piranesi. Unsettled Ground did do a very good job building atmosphere and setting, but Piranesi did a better job. Prepped versus Wild Woman in the Blues. Wild Woman gets this one. Bone White versus The Grip of It. Okay, the problem with both of these books is they both absolutely flunked the atmosphere / setting portion of the I Am a Book test. That said, I will give this to Bone White purely on the right amount of world building facet of this, because The Grip of It was absolutely allergic to world building or explaining what was happening in the given setting, which was this maybe haunted house. I don't know if it was haunted. I don't know what happened in that book, so we will give it to Bone White. Miracle Creek versus The Year of the Witching. Wow, okay, well, I think that we did find the time for The Year of the Witching to pull out ahead. Atmosphere and setting was something that book did really well, and just in general, I think it was the more atmospheric book. That was definitely a bit of a shake-up there. I did not expect Miracle Creek to go out like this. What Beauty There Is versus The Twisted Ones. This hurts me, because one of the few positive things I said about What Beauty There is that it like made me feel cold, and I felt like I was like living through a harsh Idaho winter. So like on those grounds, I definitely should give it to What Beauty There Is. But The Twisted Ones did a pretty good job of that. That wasn't an issue that I had with that book. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and give this one to, shockingly, What Beauty There Is. My reason for this being that in the end of The Twisted Ones, and this is a mild spoiler, so I'm going to put a tag up for you so that you can skip past this, we do go into like another world, and at that point in the book it started to feel like everything was a bit rushed, and I didn't quite get the same sense of atmosphere. Whereas with What Beauty There Is, I do feel like they maintained a consistent sense of atmosphere and a good amount of world building the whole time. So she lives to see another day. The Silent Patient versus Allegedly. The Silent Patient doesn't really have a lot of atmosphere, so we're gonna go ahead and just give this to Allegedly. I wish I was able to roast The Silent Patient more, but it's kind of hard to when neither book was really meant to be super atmospheric. Anxious People versus The Blacklands. Congratulations to The Blacklands. There was no way any book was going to beat you there. Blacklands had excellent atmosphere and excellent development of setting. I really felt like I was there. Felt like I was getting rained on all the time because it was in England on the moors. I'm gonna use this moment to plug it. It's a beautiful book. I think everyone should read it. Actually, no. It is quite dark and violent. Look up the trigger warnings, because but I thought it was really good. The Dark Descent versus Then She Was Gone. The Dark Descent takes this one. Midnight at the Electric versus 8 Perfect Murders. Congratulations to Midnight at the Electric. There is, once again, no way that 8 Perfect Murders would be able to stand up against your beautiful sense of atmosphere and setting. Her Dark Curiosity versus The Last Man. The Lost Man is going to take this one. Catch the Rabbit versus When We Were Lost. Catch the Rabbit wins. Easy. And I just penned my couch. Beautiful. I'm gonna put the lid on that. Clara and the Sun versus Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. I know that this is gonna be a little bit controversial because a lot of people were mad at Clara and the Sun because it didn't have a lot of world building and they kind of felt like it was a little bit lazy. I think that if you were looking at it from purely a sci-fi perspective, it feels like it's not enough world building. But for me, I kind of enjoyed that it was like confidently sparse. Like the main character, who is a robot basically, she doesn't waste time just giving you like details about the world. Like you are kind of in the dark for a lot of the book. Clara, the main character, has such like an innocent mind and she's not really looking for a lot of answers a lot of the time. So like it doesn't make sense for her to have to explain the world to the protagonist, to the audience, because that's just like how the world has always been. Like she's a robot. She doesn't really have a whole lot of concept of like history and how things have changed. Also, I just found the prose to be really engaging and that created a really strong sense of atmosphere. So Clara and the Sun is going to win this one. We Were Restless Things versus Dead Mountain. This one's tough because I think We Were Restless Things is a very atmospheric book. I think it does that very, very well. However, world building is where we're going to get picky. We Were Restless Things essentially presented this like magical realism existence, but in presenting that, it really shifted the tone of the entire book towards the end. Felt like the setting ended up like intruding on the rest of the story, if that makes any sense at all. We Were Restless Things is about a lake that keeps disappearing. And basically what I'm trying to say is when they find the lake, things just kind of go off the rails, and because of that, I feel like I can almost blame the setting for sending We Were Restless Things off the rails. Also, things are not very well explained either, which in that scenario, I did kind of need some explanation. For Clara and the Sun, I was good. I felt like I had enough. For We Were Restless Things, I was like, can you come back and like tell me what the heck any of that was? And Dead Mountain had very good atmosphere and a very good control of setting, so I'm gonna give it to that one. The Madman's Daughter versus The Winter Girl. Surprising no one, I'm gonna go ahead and let The Madman's Daughter advance on this one, and this is me genuinely allowing it to advance. I'm not just saying it so I can get rid of The Winter Girl. I do think that The Madman's Daughter did have a very good sense of atmosphere and a good development of setting. We are now moving into round 3, which will feature face-offs between Malibu Rising and The Dutch House, Wakenhurst and How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House, Piranesi and Wild Woman in the Blues, Bone White and The Year of the Witching, What Beauty There Is and Allegedly, The Blacklands and The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein, Midnight at the Electric and The Lost Man, Catch the Rabbit and Clara and the Sun, and Dead Mountain and The Madman's Daughter. And this time the determining category will be satisfying conclusion. Now, this is really going to test my brain in terms of, do I remember how any of these books ended? And I think that I do. I think that for the most part, we've whittled it down to books that I do have pretty clear recollections of. I am so glad that I have this opportunity to talk about the absolute gall that Taylor Jenkins Reid had with that ending of Malibu Rising. Listen. If you are going to promote within the synopsis and then further promote within the first chapter of a book that there is like kind of a mysterious fire that is going to burn down the entire mansion at the end. That's not a spoiler because it's in the synopsis, it's in the first chapter. But what is a spoiler is that the way that this house burns down is not a mystery, nor is it in any way suspenseful. It's just straight up stupid. Nothing even really happens. It's just like a thing that like she threw in, honestly in my opinion, so that the marketing team would have the ability to talk about this this fire that's gonna happen, just so they could rope in a couple of like thriller readers that don't typically read the type of books that Taylor Jenkins Reid writes. Quite frankly, I thought it was kind of embarrassing, and it is easily one of my biggest pet peeves with Malibu Rising. Granted, with The Dutch House, I don't feel like it had a fantastic ending either. Not because it wasn't satisfying, but more so because they drew it out so much, it just kind of felt like, okay, take a bow, please, like, you're done. Get off the stage. So neither of these books are getting like trophies in that regard, but The Dutch House is definitely advancing over Malibu Rising. It was offensive, quite frankly. It was offensive. Do not come at me teasing this like mysterious house fire and then like give me that. I remember how Wakenhurst ended, and I didn't like it. I think I've already mentioned. I felt like it opened doors that kind of shouldn't have been opened. How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House end? And this was before I kept a reading journal, so I cannot go and check. Real quick, I'm gonna go ahead and pull up my review of How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House and see if I mentioned anything about how it ended. I remember what happened in the beginning. I remember what happened in the middle. So unfortunately, I didn't say anything about how it ended. Like, I don't think it ended badly. It's just tricky because there were definitely things about Wickenhurst's ending that I did like. It was just like one little element that I was like, come on, why'd you need to add that? I think I am going to, unfortunately, have to let Wickenhurst go. Piranesi versus Wild Woman in the Blues. Wild Woman in the Blues has got this one. I really enjoyed the twist that we saw at the end of Wild Woman in the Blues. I really wanted more from the ending of Piranesi. That was really the only thing that kept me from giving a 5-star. Bone White versus The Year of the Witching. How did Bone White end? I read that book not that long ago, and I don't remember. I was satisfied in that the book was in fact over. Oh yeah, I remember. There was a whole thing with like twinness and like the devil and like you see yourself through the devil's eyes. I wasn't really vibing with it, and I liked the ending of The Year of the Witching, so we're gonna go ahead and go with that one. Now this one is interesting because the ending of Allegedly, and I am going to 100% put the spoiler tag up for this, the ending of Allegedly takes the entire book and just flips it on its head. You spend like 300 plus pages rooting for the main character, only for the ending to basically be like, you should not have been rooting for the main character. And they tell you this in like a paragraph. The reason I want to reread this book is because I don't really know if I liked it or not. Like, it definitely made an impact. So, between that and What Beauty There Is, because I remember the ending of What Beauty There Is was very confusing and I felt like not very well thought out. Like, I think it was implying that the main girl was now a ghost or that she lives forever, she's immortal. I don't know. I don't know what it was saying. I didn't really care to like find out what it was saying. So I'm gonna give it to Allegedly. Okay, The Blacklands versus The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein. The ending of The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein was rough. Mild spoiler, they went like a found family route with things, and I personally wanted things to go darker. How did The Blacklands end? Gloriously. So we're gonna go ahead and give it to The Blacklands. Midnight at the Electric versus The Lost Man. I mean, this one's tough because like Midnight at the Electric did such a good job like building up to the ending throughout, whereas with The Lost Man it was a little bit more like you spend the whole time not really knowing the truth, and then the ending is like you getting the truth, and it was a really good ending. But I just feel like Midnight at the Electric had more power because instead of it being like more of a twist, it was just like, this is what we've been building to the whole time, and now you're like going to be getting the weight of all of the messages that were supposed to be in this book from the get-go. So I'm gonna give it to Midnight at the Electric, although The Lost Man did a fantastic job with that. Next up we have Catch the Rabbit and Clara and the Sun. This is really no contest. Clara and the Sun wins this by a mile. Catch the Rabbit, as much as I enjoyed that book, the ending was pretty abrupt, and I do think it was meant to be like a little bit confusing, so like I can't be too upset with it for being as confusing as it was. And I don't even want to say it was confusing. That's not really the issue. It was more just like, okay, so I get where you're going with this, but that doesn't mean you can't tell us XYZ. Like, I understand what you're saying here, and now the book's over, but can we, like, go back a couple pages and be like, this happened, this happened, this happened. Like, I'm just missing some pieces here, and I would like to not be. Versus Clara and the Sun, I cried. That ending made me cry, and I loved it. As I thought, the 5-star club is doing quite well, and there's an imminent face-off between the three of them very soon. Dead Mountain versus The Madman's Daughter for the conclusion. Spoiler for Madman's Daughter right now. I liked the conclusion of it because it involved the guy that I didn't like dying. I enjoyed that. However, they brought him back to life in the second book, and it made me mad. Versus with Dead Mountain, I just felt like it was a genuinely strong conclusion. Obviously, that one was nonfiction, so it's like they're making the conclusion that they can. I mean, this book could have gone forever, just spiraling into different theories, but I do feel like they did a good job wrapping things up, so I'm gonna give this one to Dead Mountain. Now, moving into round 4, we've got The Dutch House versus How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House, and congratulations to How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House. You are officially the only 3-star book to make it into round 4. Next up, we've got Wild Woman in the Blues and The Year of the Witching, both 4-star books that I really enjoyed. Then we have Allegedly versus the Blacklands. I do think the Blacklands is going to pull it out, but we'll see. And then finally, we have 3 books all in one battle, unfortunately, because we have an uneven amount of books. That's going to be Midnight at the Electric, Clara and the Sun, and Dead Mountain. I'm sorry, Dead Mountain. You had a good run. I think that one of the 5 stars is going to take it, but who knows? It all depends on the next category, which is characterization / character development. Now, for our first category, we are coming up across the issue of narrative size. The Dutch House is relatively intimate. We're mainly focused on Danny and Maeve, 2 siblings, and because it is literary fiction, it definitely zeroes in on these characters. But with the One-Armed Sister, I want to give credit where credit is due. It has a much bigger cast, and it jumps perspectives constantly, so you're getting a lot of different people, and I do feel like it did that very well. But I am going to give this to the Dutch House purely because I didn't feel like I understood the motivations of some of the main central characters in how the One-Armed Sister sweeps her house, whereas with the Dutch House I really did understand the motivations the whole time, which is not to say that I liked the Dutch House characters better. I loved Maeve. Danny, ugh. Next up, we have Wild Woman in the Blues and The Year of the Witching. This one I'm going to give to Wild Woman in the Blues. I didn't feel like The Year of the Witching had fantastic characterization. It felt a little bit like the roles that the characters were in kind of overpowered who they actually were. Like, we had kind of like the stereotypical sweet friend, we had like the love interest that's like surprisingly a feminist when nobody else is, and like it didn't hurt my enjoyment of the story as I was reading it. It didn't feel like there was a gaping lack of characterization. It was just that one element that kept me from like really loving the book when it really came down to it. Allegedly versus the Blacklands. This one is tough in this scenario as well, because you do end up rooting so much for the main character in Allegedly. However, the cast is rather large, and in that large cast, it sometimes felt like, am I supposed to know that much about this person? Am I supposed to like feel a lot for this person? Am I supposed to like already have an opinion formed on this person? I don't really know. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this one to the Blacklands. And now, what to do about these 3 books. Now, Dead Mountain, I'm gonna go ahead and just eliminate right now. I feel like Clara and the Sun has an amazing perspective that you're following. Like, Clara is such a delight to read from, and I felt like I knew her really well, which is a difficult task to accomplish when it's literally a robot and not a human being. That said, I'm going to give this one to Midnight at the Electric because Midnight at the Electric has 3 different perspectives, and I felt like all of the characters were fleshed out an appropriate amount for what role they filled. Whereas with Clara and the Sun, there was a lot of focus on Clara's perspective, and then with some of the other characters, it didn't necessarily feel like I knew them as a person, could really understand their motives. But I am pretty confident that Midnight at the Electric deserves this. It did such a good job with characterization, and I think it might win. Honestly, I think it's gonna win the whole thing. All right, after a brief break for charging the camera, we're back, ready to pick the determining element for round 5, which consists of the Dutch House and Wild Woman in the Blues going head-to-head, as well as the Blacklands and Midnight at the Electric, which means there will in fact be a 4-star book that is going to be in the final round, which is exciting. Concept to plot follow-through. Now, the concept of the Dutch House is that we've got 2 siblings that lose their mother when they're young, and then their father remarries to a woman that eventually basically tries to run them out of their own house. It's essentially a Cinderella story told through a man's perspective, and then, you know, there's some other things too that make it not Cinderella, but like the core idea is kind of, it's a Cinderella story, the idea of this evil stepmother coming in and disrupting your life. And I think that the book did do what it came to do. Wild Woman in the Blues, the concept there is we've got a dual perspective, one where we're following Honor Ray, who is a dancer in the 20s, and she ends up kind of falling into a bit of like a murder plot. And then at the same time, we have this man named Sawyer who is trying to interview Honore, who is now quite ancient in the modern day, because he believes that she could lead him to this like lost file from years and years ago. And I'm gonna go ahead and give this one to the Dutch House. I think that there was a lot that kind of sometimes got in the way of getting to like the actual meat of the plot in Wild Woman in the Blues. There's a little bit of repetition that sometimes didn't really need to be there and was just kind of padding things just so that we wouldn't really be in the plot. And then looking at our 5-star bracket, we have The Blacklands and Midnight at the Electric. And I wish this was a harder decision because I do really love both books and I think both of them did such a good job delivering a like fresh, exciting concept and then really pulling through with it and like actually committing to it. But I'm gonna give this to Midnight at the Electric because not only did it have, in my opinion, a more unique concept, but it was also quite ambitious for this book to take the 3 different main characters and timelines and settings and weave them all together, and to be able to do that was really impressive. And I think it was just doing something a little bit more original than The Blacklands. Okay, alright. I'm so sorry to The Blacklands. It was such a good book. But that brings us to the moment where we decide who is crowned victor of the 77th Hunger Games. Although that's not what's happening here. Although all of these books are now out of print, as I mentioned. Big congratulations to the Dutch House and Midnight at the Electric for getting this far. That's pretty crazy. I read so many books this year, and for me to continually pick you as the better book, that is really, really cool. So here we have the most important drawing of all. And it is Page Turn Appeal. And in that case, Midnight at the Electric is the winner of 2021's Bookish Tournament. Best Cockroach of the Year award goes to Midnight at the Electric, although I will be honest, I have no qualms in saying that it's also the best book of the year. It was truly a fantastic novel, and I am sorry that I doubted it when I picked it up from the library, read the synopsis, and was like, this book's gonna be a mess, isn't it? So Midnight at the Electric has won fair and square. Not only are the other books no longer in print, Midnight at the Electric is now in print so much more. You can find it at every local library, every Barnes & Noble, every, like, Amazon warehouses are just full of Midnight at the Electric. You can walk into any indie bookstore and they'll give it to you for free. Simply because I promised I would do this. Congratulations to The Winter Girl, The Other Black Girl, The Silent Patient, The Grip of It, and When We Were Lost. You made it through a single round. Good for you. Congratulations to Bone White and What Beauty There Is. You made it to round 3, and for a 2-star book, that's pretty impressive. I did not like either of you, but clearly you had some merits. If said merits mean being better than a single book in a single element, then yes, you had some merits. And then like a genuine congratulations to How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House. Once again, there were a lot of things that were really good about this book. So even though there were certainly some moments where I feel like it kind of got the go-ahead based on very little, once again, I do not know how that book ended. I could have hated it, I can't remember. But the results don't lie. Oh, that's what my skin tone is actually supposed to be. I'm just gonna hold up the paper the whole time then. The results don't lie. How the One-Armed Sister won. And then I want to give it up for the Dutch House for not only being the top runner-up, but also being the winner of the 4-star club. This was a really strong book, and I am actually looking forward to read more from this author, Ann Patchett. You've probably heard of her. And then a final big congratulations to Midnight at the Electric for being just such a solid book in pretty much every respect that I can think of. And I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up this probably very, very long video by saying thank you so much for watching. If you're not subscribed, please do so. It makes my heart very happy when I see a new subscriber. I try to put out at least 3 videos a month, so you can expect lots more booktube content from me, and I look forward to continuing this journey and potentially doing this again next year because it was really, really fun. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again soon.